What if everything you know about early European history is incomplete or deliberately altered? What if a forgotten dynasty, one with claims of divine blood, supernatural origins, and symbols still echoing across Europe, was quietly erased from official record? Tonight, we open a forbidden chapter of the past, a chapter many believe was never meant to be uncovered. Welcome to the Merovingian Mystery, a journey into the Dark Age's greatest cover-up. A story involving long-haired sacred kings, a seaborn founder shrouded in myth, secret societies guarding ancient bloodlines, and the Knights Templar, whose hidden discoveries may have changed history forever. This is not the history you learned in school. This is the history that survived in symbols, rituals, and whispers. And before we begin, thank you. Truly. Your time, your curiosity, and your support allow us to keep exploring the mysteries the world has forgotten. Every like, comment, and subscription helps this channel uncover deeper truths and bring more hidden history to light. You are the reason this journey continues. So settle in, take a breath. The past is calling, and tonight we answer. Chapter 1: The Legend They Tried to Erase. In the dim corridors of European history, where fact and legend mingle like mist on ancient stone, there lies a story almost never told in full. A story that flickers faintly beneath the official chronicles and resurfaces only in whispers, symbols, and forgotten rituals. It is the story of the Merovingians, Europe's long-haired kings, and the possibility that their fall was not merely political, but a deliberate erasure of a bloodline believed to be sacred. The history books tell us that the Merovingian Dynasty once ruled vast swaths of Western Europe from the 5th to the 8th century. But what they do not emphasize, what they often skip entirely, is why this dynasty, unlike any before or after, was enveloped in an aura of divine legitimacy. Their authority did not rest solely on conquest or inheritance. It was woven into myths, sacred symbols, and a mysterious origin that set them apart from all other royal houses. The Merovingians were not simply kings, they were believed to be chosen. For centuries, scholars, monks, and later secret societies tried to interpret their origins, their symbols, and their downfall. Yet just as the dynasty reached its peak, something strange happened. Their legacy began to blur. Records thinned. Chronicles grew silent. The kings diminished into ceremonial figures and then vanished from the throne as quietly as a candle being pinched out in the dark. But why? To understand the importance of this silence, we must first understand what made the Merovingians so different. Their founding legend, their sacred hair, and their emblem, the honeybee, were not mere decorations. They were declarations of divine right. Symbols etched into crown jewels, carved into stone, and embedded into the very identity of their kingdom. These symbols told a story not just of power, but of a bloodline believed to carry something otherworldly, something ancient. And when a bloodline is believed to be sacred, when kings are thought to descend not only from warriors, but from beings touched by the divine, then their removal from history becomes more than a political shift. It becomes a cover-up. For centuries after their fall, competing dynasties and church chroniclers painted the Merovingians as sloth kings, rulers too weak or lazy to govern. But the deeper one dives into the surviving fragments, the clearer it becomes that this portrayal was convenient, not truthful. It allowed their successors, the Carolingians, to justify their takeover. It allowed the church to align itself with a new order, and it allowed the world to forget that a ruling house once existed whose legitimacy was rooted in myths so powerful that they threatened the rising structures of medieval authority. And even more unsettling is what followed. As their political lines were erased, their symbols, bees, waves, fleur-de-lis, long hair, began to appear in mysterious places long after the dynasty was gone. Carved into Templar stonework, hidden in medieval manuscripts, whispered in the rituals of secret societies that emerged centuries later. It was as if the memory of the Merovingians had not died, but had merely gone underground. And this is where our journey begins, at the crossroads of history, legend, and deliberate forgetting. The Merovingians may have vanished from the throne, but their story, fragmented, mythic, dangerous, never truly disappeared. It lingers in the shadows of Europe's past, waiting to be pieced together. And as we step further into the darkness, we must ask, who wanted the Merovingians forgotten, and what secret were they trying to erase?
Chapter 2. Meroving, the seaborn founder of a sacred bloodline. To understand the mystery of the Merovingians, we must travel back nearly 15 centuries, to a world where the borders of history dissolve into legend, and where kings were believed to be chosen not merely by lineage, but by forces far older than Christianity itself. At the heart of this world stands a figure whose story has survived only in fragments, Meroving, the enigmatic founder of the Merovingian Dynasty. His birth is cloaked in myth as strange and haunting as the tides that carried it. According to the historian Gregory of Tours, one of the earliest chroniclers of the Frankish people, the mother of Meroving, while pregnant, wandered down to the sea. There, she encountered a mysterious creature known in ancient lore as the Quinotaur, the five-horned beast of the waters. No scribe recorded the details of their meeting. No annal dared to describe what transpired. The story simply says she returned from the sea changed, and soon after, she gave birth to Meroving. To a modern mind, this may sound like folklore, but in the 5th century, a time when pagan beliefs and early Christian doctrine still coexisted uneasily, such tales carried immense weight. This was not a scandalous myth whispered behind palace doors. It was a declaration, a signal that the Merovingian bloodline was no ordinary lineage. Meroving's origin placed him between two worlds, the realm of men and the realm of the divine. And to early Frankish tribes, ruling through the storm of Rome's collapse, such a union was more than symbolic. It was a mandate. The significance of this legend cannot be overstated. In the early medieval world, a king did not rule by force alone. True legitimacy required divine sanction. While other tribes claimed descent from gods of the sky or the forge, the Merovingians claimed something more primal, a bond with the deep, with the ancient waters revered in countless pre-Christian traditions. Water was life, death, rebirth. It was mystery incarnate. And so Meroving became more than a leader. He became a sacred king, someone whose veins carried a spark of the supernatural. With him began the tradition that would define the dynasty for generations, the long, uncut royal hair. For the Merovingians, hair was not merely decoration. It was the outward mark of sacred inheritance. To cut a king's hair was to sever his divine connection, to strip him not just of power, but of his very right to exist as ruler. Legends say that no Merovingian king ever permitted his hair to be cut. Chronicles describe royal barbers who touched the king's head only to gently shape the ends, never to shorten them. The long hair flowed like a physical reminder of the dynasty's mythical origins, a living testament to the Quinotar's ancient blessing. But Merovingian's legacy extended beyond symbols. He embodied a belief system that blurred the boundaries of religion and magic. His bloodline, the Merovingians, were not merely rulers, they were guardians of a cosmic balance, chosen by forces that human institutions could neither control nor fully understand. This belief gave the dynasty immense power. Their rivals feared them not just as warriors, but as beings protected by destiny. And their followers believed that as long as the blood of Merovingian flowed through their kings, the kingdom would prosper under divine watch. Yet such extraordinary legitimacy carries an extraordinary danger. For if a bloodline draws its authority from myth, then anyone threatened by that myth, church, rival dynasties, emerging political powers, has reason to erase it. The story of Merovingian is the story of a beginning, but it is also the beginning of a threat so profound that centuries later, long after the last Merovingian left the throne, the dynasty's symbols would still echo in secret societies, in hidden manuscripts, and in the shadows beneath Europe's most sacred architecture. Because if Merovingian's blood was truly divine, then erasing his descendants may have required more than political force. It may have required rewriting history itself.
Chapter 3. Clovis I, warrior king who rewrote Europe. By the late 5th century, the Western Roman Empire had collapsed into a fractured mosaic of tribes, warlords, and fading imperial remnants. Amid this chaos, the young warrior king ascended the throne of a small Frankish realm. His name was Clovis I, and though few could have predicted it at the time, he would become one of the most pivotal figures in European history. If Merov provided the mythic spark that gave the Merovingians divine mystique, Clovis was the force that turned that spark into a roaring political blaze. Clovis inherited little more than a modest territory and an uncertain future. Surrounded by powerful enemies, the Alemanni, the Visigoths, remnants of Roman influence, his survival depended not only on military strength, but on the ability to unite the fractious Frankish tribes under a single banner. What he achieved went far beyond mere unification. He laid the foundation for medieval France and carved a place for the Merovingians at the very heart of Europe. The turning point came in 496 CE at the Battle of Tolbiac, a clash that would echo through the centuries. As the Franks faltered under the fierce assault of the Alemanni, Clovis stood on the edge of defeat. According to legend, in the chaos of battle, he uttered a desperate prayer, not to the pagan gods of his ancestors, but to the Christian god of his wife, Queen Clotilde, a devout Catholic. He vowed that if victory were granted, he would convert. Moments later, the tide turned. The Alemanni king fell, their forces scattered, and Clovis emerged triumphant. True to his vow, he accepted baptism in a grand ceremony described as the baptism of more than a king, for with it an entire people embraced Christianity. This was far more than a religious gesture. It was a political masterstroke. By aligning himself with the Roman Church, the most stable and influential institution in a disintegrating world, Clovis gained a legitimacy no tribal king could match. Unlike the surrounding Germanic rulers, many of whom followed Arian Christianity, Clovis embraced Catholic orthodoxy, instantly winning the support of bishops, Romanized elites, and the remnants of imperial administration. This alliance gave him three powerful tools. First, a moral and spiritual authority that elevated him above rival kings. Second, administrative support from church networks spread throughout Gaul. Third, a divine narrative that blended seamlessly with the Merovingians' mythic origins. With the church's blessing, Clovis expanded relentlessly. He conquered the Visigoths and Aquitaine, subdued rival tribes, and absorbed vast stretches of territory. By the time he founded his capital in Paris, he had transformed the Franks from a small confederation into a sprawling kingdom spanning from the Rhine to the Pyrenees. Under his rule, the first codified legal system of the Franks was established, preserving tribal customs while integrating Roman principles. It stabilized governance, regulated inheritance, and laid the groundwork for centuries of Frankish administration. Yet Clovis's greatest achievement was not his conquests, nor even his alliance with the Church. It was the synthesis of myth and religion, pagan legend and Christian authority into a single, potent doctrine of sacred kingship. Through him, the Merovingian Dynasty elevated its identity from tribal rulers to God-anointed monarchs whose power seemed to flow from both divine blood and divine blessing. But this triumph carried a hidden flaw. According to tradition, when Clovis died in 511 CE, his kingdom was divided among his 4 sons. This practice, partible inheritance, preserved family unity at first, but sowed the seeds of fragmentation. The golden age forged by Clovis would shine brightly, but cracks were already forming beneath its surface. Soon, the Merovingians would learn that even the most sacred bloodlines were vulnerable not to conquerors from beyond their borders, but to the shifting tides of power within their own household. Chapter 4: Power Divided, the Golden Age, and Hidden Cracks. When Clovis I died in 511 CE, the Merovingian world stood at the height of its power. The Franks controlled a vast kingdom stretching from the Atlantic to the Rhine, from the North Sea to the foothills of the Pyrenees. Their kings, long-haired, divinely sanctioned, and symbolically charged, were regarded as sacred figures in a Europe still rebuilding itself after the fall of Rome. Yet at the very moment of triumph, the seeds of decline were quietly planted, waiting for generations to take root. The cause lay in the age-old Frankish tradition of partible inheritance. Unlike later monarchies where the eldest son inherited everything, Merovingian custom demanded that the kingdom be divided among the king's sons. Each son became a ruler in his own right, governing a portion of the kingdom while still belonging to the sacred bloodline. In theory, this maintained unity. In practice, it created a delicate mosaic of semi-independent realms, each with its own ambitions, rivalries, and burdens. After Clovis, the empire fractured into sub-kingdoms: Austrasia, Neustria, Burgundy, and Aquitaine, each with its own royal court, treasury, and shifting alliances. Although all rulers descended from Meroving and shared the divine mystique of the long-haired kings, their competing political interests often overshadowed their common heritage. Brothers became rivals, cousins became adversaries, and while the Merovingians expanded their influence for nearly 2 centuries, the fractures beneath the surface widened with each generation. Yet this era was not defined solely by conflict. In many ways, it was a golden age. The Merovingians presided over a fusion of Roman administration, Germanic traditions, and Christian influence. Grand churches, monasteries, and royal residences rose across Gaul. Paris, Soissons, Metz, and Orléans flourished as centers of culture and governance. Trade routes revived, weaving together networks of commerce that brought prosperity from far beyond the borders of the realm. Perhaps most distinctive was the Merovingians' use of sacred symbolism. The long hair of the kings remained a potent emblem of divine authority. Their hair was guarded with almost ritual devotion. To cut it was to strip a king of legitimacy itself. In Merovingian belief, the hair was not merely a physical attribute, but a living connection to the sacred force inherited from Merovingi's seaborn origin. Alongside the hair, another symbol gained prominence, the honeybee. Appearing on jewelry, signet rings, and ceremonial objects, the bee represented immortality, order, and a harmonious society modeled after the structured unity of a hive. To Merovingian followers, the bee was both a divine symbol and a political message. The Merovingian kingdom was ordained by cosmic order, a realm where power flowed from ancient authority rather than earthly rivalry. But symbolism alone could not bind a fractured empire. As generations passed, the sub-kingdoms frequently clashed, their rulers waging wars to reunify the realm or assert dominance over their cousins. Some kings, like Dagobert I, managed to temporarily restore unity and authority, but the cycle of division, conflict, and redivision persisted. By the 7th century, cracks in the dynasty became impossible to ignore. The constant partitioning weakened centralized power. Royal authority became increasingly ceremonial. Local nobles gained influence. And perhaps most significantly, the administrative role of the mayor of the palace, originally a household steward, began to expand quietly. While kings basked in sacred ritual, the mayors handled the machinery of governance, taxes, military logistics, diplomacy, and the management of vast royal estates. Over time, these practical powers grew, and with them, a subtle shift occurred. The sacred kings still bore the long hair and sat upon the throne, but the throne itself was hollow. And those who now controlled the kingdom from behind the curtain would shape the destiny of Europe for centuries to come.
Chapter 5. The Mayors of the Palace. Power behind the throne. By the dawn of the 7th century, the Merovingian world still shimmered with the symbols of sacred kingship. Long hair flowing like a banner of divine right, bees gleaming on royal artifacts, and rituals reminding the people that their rulers descended from the mysterious seaborn Meroving. But while the kings continued to embody ceremony and myth, a quiet shift was taking place beneath the grandeur of the throne. Real power, administrative, military, and financial, was slipping into the hands of others. These new power brokers were not kings, nor even princes. They were the mayors of the palace, originally humble estate managers responsible for household affairs, estate revenues, and the oversight of royal property. What began as a logistical role soon expanded into something far more potent. As Merovingian kings became increasingly ceremonial and fragmented by the system of partible inheritance, the demands of governance grew. Someone had to negotiate with nobles, command armies, manage taxation, and steer the complex relationships between the sub-kingdoms. And so, step by step, the mayors took on responsibilities the kings no longer exercised. By mid-century, their power had become undeniable. In some regions, especially Austrasia, the mayor was effectively the ruler in all but name, issuing decrees, directing campaigns, and controlling the treasury. The king attended ceremonies. The mayor governed. But among these mayors, one family rose above all others, the Pippinids. Their ascent began quietly. Through strategic marriages, careful alliances, and shrewd administrative control, they accumulated power across Austrasia. Pepin of Landen laid the groundwork. His descendants, including Pepin of Herstal, built upon it. And then came the figure who would transform the balance of power entirely, Charles Martel. Charles Martel, the Hammer, was never king, yet he wielded authority unmatched by any Merovingian ruler of his time. His decisive victory at the Battle of Tours in 732, halting the advance of Muslim forces into Western Europe, elevated him from a powerful noble to a defender of Christendom. While the Merovingian king sat in ceremonial isolation, Charles commanded armies, negotiated with bishops, awarded lands, and restructured the kingdom's military system. His reforms, including the allocation of church lands to fund mounted warriors, reshaped European warfare for centuries. He ruled without wearing a crown, and no one dared challenge him. With Martel, the transformation was complete. The Merovingian king was now a symbolic relic, a reminder of a sacred past that no longer influenced the political present. But even Charles Martel did not take the throne, perhaps out of respect for the ancient tradition, perhaps to avoid direct conflict with the church, or perhaps because the time was not yet ripe. It would be his son, Pepin the Short, who would cross the threshold from shadow to crown. Pepin inherited both the title of mayor and the reality of total control over the Frankish kingdom. The king, Childeric III, remained on the throne in name only. But as Pepin's power grew, the contradiction became impossible to ignore. The man who governed was not the man who wore the crown. Thus, Pepin posed a daring question to Pope Zachary. Who should be king? The one who holds the title, or the one who holds the power? The Pope answered with rare clarity. Authority and power should belong to the same person. It was a verdict that sealed the Merovingians' fate. Within a few short years, the final act of the sacred dynasty would unfold. Childeric III would be deposed. His long hair, the emblem of divine legitimacy, would be cut, and the Carolingian dynasty would rise in his place. But even as the mayors claimed the throne, questions lingered. Had they overthrown a weakened dynasty, or had they deliberately uprooted a bloodline whose origins and claims still threatened the new order? The story of the Merovingians was about to take a darker turn.
Chapter 6: The Fall of a Sacred Dynasty. By the mid-8th century, the Merovingian Dynasty, once the embodiment of sacred kingship, had been reduced to a shadow of its former glory. Their long hair still signified divine lineage, their symbols still glimmered on royal artifacts, and their names still carried echoes of Merovingian mythic origins. But everything else had changed. The kings no longer ruled, they presided. They no longer commanded, they appeared. Ceremony had replaced authority. Ritual had smothered governance. And standing behind the throne was the man who controlled it all, Pepin the Short, son of Charles Martel. Pepin ruled the kingdom in every practical sense, but the presence of a Merovingian king, Childeric III, posed a contradiction too glaring to endure. If the king was sacred, how could Pepin justify his authority? And if Pepin truly governed, why should a Merovingian, divinely anointed by birth, remain on the throne? Pepin understood that to claim the crown, he needed more than ambition. He needed legitimacy. And so, in an unprecedented move, he turned to the highest spiritual authority in the West, the papacy. In 750 CE, Pepin sent an emissary to Pope Zachary, presenting a deceptively simple question, one that would alter the course of European history. Who should be king? The one who holds the title, or the one who holds the power? The Pope's answer would enter the annals of destiny. It is better for the one who holds power to be king. It was the spiritual endorsement Pepin needed. The ancient divine right of the Merovingians, rooted in myth and symbol, was undone by a single clerical decision. In 751, the final ceremony of the Merovingian Dynasty took place at Soissons. There was no war, no bloodshed, no grand uprising. Instead, The fall of a sacred lineage unfolded with eerily quietness. Childeric III, the last Merovingian king, was brought forward. He was a king in name only, a ceremonial figure long overshadowed by Pepin's control of the military, treasury, and nobility. Yet what happened next struck at the very heart of the Merovingian identity. In front of nobles and clergy, Childeric's long hair, the symbol of his sacred legitimacy, was cut. That single act was more than humiliation. It was a ritual execution of divine authority. According to ancient custom, a Merovingian king whose hair had been shorn was no longer a king at all, but an ordinary man. His sacred link to Merovingian mythic lineage was severed. His claim to rule evaporated. It was as though Pepin and the Church were not merely removing a dynasty, they were extinguishing a supernatural inheritance older than Christian kingship itself. After the ceremony, Childeric III was taken to a monastery, where he would live out the rest of his life in obscurity. No rebellion rose in his name. No loyalist army marched. The dynasty that once wielded the weight of myth and divine mandate simply disappeared. This quiet erasure raises unsettling questions. Why was such a powerful dynasty removed with so little resistance? Why did centuries of sacred symbolism, hair, bees, divine right, crumble without a fight? And most importantly, was their fall a natural decline or a deliberate cover-up? For centuries afterward, the Carolingians and church-affiliated chroniclers would rewrite the narrative. They painted the Merovingians as rois fainéants, the do-nothing kings, lazy, ineffective, unfit to rule. But this portrayal may have been a tool, not a truth, a way to justify the takeover, a way to bury a lineage too sacred, too mysterious, perhaps too threatening to the rising order of medieval Europe. The sacred kings were gone, but their symbols remained, quiet, lingering, powerful. And soon another force would emerge, a force shrouded in secrecy, bound to Jerusalem and rumored to guard the very secrets the Merovingians left behind. The Knights Templar were about to step onto the stage of history. Chapter 7. The Knights Templar and the Lost Bloodline. With the Merovingian dynasty quietly removed from power and their sacred symbols fading from public life, Europe moved into a new era. Kingdoms rose and fell. New dynasties carved their names into the continent. But the question lingered like a shadow. What became of the sacred bloodline that once claimed divine origin? For nearly 4 centuries after Childeric III's deposition, this question remained buried. Then suddenly, a new force emerged, one that would revive whispers of hidden knowledge, forbidden relics, and ancient secrets concealed beneath the surface of Christian Europe. They were called the Knights Templar. Formed in 1119 CE, the Templars began as a small band of 9 knights. Their mission sounded simple: protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Yet from the moment they were founded, the Templars occupied a position far too privileged, far too symbolically charged for a humble group of warriors. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem gave them headquarters on the site believed to be the Temple of Solomon, one of the holiest places in biblical history. Beneath this structure lay a labyrinth of vaults and tunnels untouched for centuries. And for nearly a decade, the Templars lived atop these ruins, conducting activities almost entirely absent from the surviving records. What were they doing during those missing years? Why did they enjoy such unusual favor from kings and clergy, despite their tiny numbers? And why did they rise from obscurity to power with unprecedented speed? Historians note that during this period, the Templars had no real capacity to guard thousands of pilgrims. Their order was simply too small. Yet they remained in the temple, digging, exploring, searching. And this is where the Merovingian mystery resurfaces. A long-standing theory suggests that beneath the Temple Mount, the Templars discovered something extraordinary. Documents, relics, or genealogical evidence linking the Merovingians to early Christianity, perhaps even to Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. If true, this would reshape every hierarchy in medieval Europe. It would grant the Merovingians a divine legitimacy far surpassing the Carolingians who replaced them. It would challenge the Church's authority. It would alter the foundation of kingship itself. Whatever the Templars found, if indeed they found anything, triggered a transformation. By 1129 CE, they were formally recognized by the Pope and granted privileges no other order enjoyed. Exemption from taxes, independence from all secular rulers, and authority answerable only to the papacy. Their rise was meteoric. Within a century, they owned vast fortresses, fleets of ships, banking houses, and thousands of estates across Europe and the Middle East. They became an economic and military superpower, an empire within empires. And yet the Templars carried with them an aura of secrecy. Their rituals were hidden. Their symbols were enigmatic. Their architecture and the underground chambers beneath many of their strongholds suggested a network designed not merely for defense, but for safeguarding something of immense value. Was it treasure? Sacred knowledge? Or the remnants of a bloodline erased from public history? In southern France, once the heart of the Merovingian rule, Templar fortresses multiplied. Legends tell of chests brought from Jerusalem and hidden in these lands. Local families whispered of a lineage protected by the Knights. In certain villages, the Merovingian symbols of bees, long-haired kings, and wave motifs reappeared, quietly, subtly, defiantly. The connection between the Templars and the Merovingians may never be proven outright, but the convergence of symbols, geography, and timing is too precise, too haunting, to dismiss entirely. One dynasty was erased. Another order rose in the shadows. And between them, a secret may have passed, a torch carried through centuries, hidden behind stone walls, encrypted in symbols, preserved by those sworn to protect it at all costs. The stage was set. A sacred bloodline may have vanished from the throne, but not from history.
Chapter 8: Secret Symbols, Hidden Societies, and Forbidden Knowledge. If the Merovingians truly faded into the shadows after the fall of their dynasty, their memory should have vanished entirely. Their symbols should have disappeared. Their story should have decayed with the parchment it was written on. And yet, centuries later, echoes of their presence appear in the most unexpected places. Not in royal archives or official histories, but carved into stone, woven into architecture, and embedded in the rituals of those who operated far from public view. To decode this mystery, we must step into a world where art becomes language, architecture becomes cipher, and symbols speak truths that words are forbidden to express. In medieval Europe, imagery was more than decoration. When literacy was rare and books were precious, symbols were the most powerful tool of communication. The Knights Templar, the same order rumored to have uncovered Merovingian secrets beneath the Temple of Solomon, became masters of this symbolic language. Their churches, fortresses, and commanderies stretch across Europe like silent markers on a map. At first glance, they seem merely functional or ornamental structures. But look closer, and something striking emerges. On columns, arches, and floor tiles, one finds honeybees, sometimes etched subtly into stonework, sometimes stylized into geometric motifs. Bees, ancient symbols of immortality and cosmic order, were the sacred emblem of the Merovingian kings.
Their presence within Templar architecture is never explained by official records. It shouldn't be there. Yet, it is. Elsewhere, in stained glass windows, we see long-haired kings rendered anonymously, figures bearing no names, recorded in no catalogue of saints or monarchs. Their flowing hair echoes the Merovingian belief that royal legitimacy lived in the untouched length of a king's hair, a symbol of divine inheritance. Other motifs appear again and again: the fleur-de-lis, long before it became the emblem of the French monarchy; the wave or fish patterns that recall Maeve's mythic seaborn origin; and geometric alignments that connect Templar sites to older Merovingian centers like Paris, Saint-Denis, and the ancient heartlands of Neustria and Austrasia. Taken individually, these might be coincidences. Together, they form a pattern, a symbolic network whispering a story that official history silenced. Architecture also plays its part. Many Templar structures use circular or octagonal designs, shapes associated with perfection, resurrection, and the merging of earthly and divine realms. These shapes appear in key Merovingian sites as well, sometimes centuries earlier, suggesting a continuity of esoteric architectural language. But it is not only in buildings that the legacy survived. Long after the Templars were suppressed, new groups emerged: Freemasons, Rosicrucians, the Priory of Sion, and other esoteric societies. Though their origins are debated, their rituals often include symbols that trace directly back to Merovingian and Templar traditions: bees, lilies, the sacred king, the hidden bloodline, the marriage of divine and mortal. In certain secret rites, initiates reenact coronation ceremonies reminiscent of Merovingian customs. In others, they recite verses hinting at a forgotten lineage protected across generations. Some lodges even claim custodianship of ancient genealogies, papers allegedly linking European royal houses to the long-haired kings of the Dark Ages. These societies never openly proclaim that they guard Merovingian secrets. Yet their symbols, their architecture, and their whispered traditions suggest they may carry fragments of a larger, hidden story. Perhaps the Merovingian legacy did not vanish with Childeric III's tonsure. Perhaps it was merely moved, shifted from the visible throne into invisible networks operating behind the fabric of European society. In this hidden world, knowledge becomes power, symbolism becomes memory, and secrecy becomes survival. What the Merovingians lost publicly, their symbols may have preserved privately. But symbols alone cannot protect a legacy forever. Soon, the forces that upheld the Templar order would face a catastrophic reckoning. A reckoning that would scatter their secrets across Europe and plunge the Merovingian mystery deeper into the shadows than ever before.
Chapter 9. From the Da Vinci Code to Modern Conspiracies. By the time Europe crossed into the 19th and 20th centuries, the Merovingian story had endured 1,000 transformations. Half-whispered legend, half-speculative scholarship, half-fading memory preserved in obscure manuscripts, folktales, and esoteric symbolism. But what happened next would propel this forgotten dynasty from the footnotes of history into the center of global imagination. Not through archaeology, nor through the discovery of any long-lost royal document, but through the power of literature, mass media, and popular culture. It began subtly. During the Romantic era of the 1800s, Europe was swept by a nostalgic fascination with the medieval past. Artists, poets, and early historians dug into the origins of European identity.
In France, a country built on the foundations the Merovingians once laid, interest surged. Long-haired kings appeared in paintings. Scholars re-examined royal tombs. The idea of an ancient, forgotten dynasty stirred the national imagination. At the same time, secret societies, many claiming ties to Templar traditions, began weaving the Merovingians into their ritual symbolism. Within closed lodges, whispers grew that the Merovingians were not merely early kings of France, but custodians of a sacred inheritance. Some groups suggested that documents survived, hidden away from public eyes, that linked the long-haired kings to early Christianity, perhaps even to the blood of Christ himself. This fusion, history, religion, mystery, proved irresistible. By the early 20th century, newspapers, occult journals, and fringe historians were speculating about the Merovingians as if they were a missing puzzle piece in a much larger story, a dynasty erased not by chance, but by design. But it was in the late 20th century that the legend exploded. In 1982, a book appeared that would permanently alter the world's perception of the Merovingian dynasty. It was called Holy Blood, Holy Grail, written by Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. Blending historical research with bold speculative leaps, the book proposed that the Merovingians were descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and that their bloodline had been protected for centuries by the Knights Templar and a secret society called the Priory of Sion. Historians condemned the book as pseudo-history. The Church denounced it as sensationalism, but none of that mattered. The public was captivated. Holy Blood, Holy Grail became a global bestseller. It generated documentaries, debates, and an explosion of curiosity about the Templars, the Grail myth, and the mysterious Merovingian bloodline. For the first time in centuries, the dynasty erased in the 8th century was now embedded in modern culture. Then, in 2003, the world changed again. Dan Brown published The Da Vinci Code. The novel took the theories from Holy Blood, Holy Grail, reshaped them into a fast-paced thriller, and launched them onto the world stage. Sold in more than 80 countries, translated into dozens of languages, and eventually adapted into a blockbuster film, it thrust the Merovingian mystery into the minds of hundreds of millions of readers and viewers. Suddenly, people everywhere, from scholars to casual readers, were asking the same questions. What if the Merovingians didn't disappear? What if their bloodline continues today? What if history has been hiding a secret capable of reshaping religion and politics? Tourists flooded places like Rennes-le-Château in southern France, rumored to be connected to the mystery. Academic conferences debated the plausibility of hidden bloodlines. Online forums and later social media turned the Merovingians into a cultural phenomenon. Yet with this newfound fame came a dangerous fog. Fact blurred with fiction, theory blurred with invention, history blurred with Hollywood. People who had never heard of the Merovingians were now convinced they held the key to the deepest secrets of the Church, the Templars, and European power structures. Some embraced the legend, others rejected it entirely, but everyone, it seemed, was talking about it. The Merovingians had risen again, not as kings, but as symbols. Symbols of secrecy, symbols of forbidden knowledge, symbols of a truth that always seems just out of reach. And with their return to the spotlight, a new chapter of conspiracy began, one that would no longer be confined to the past, but would reach into the political and economic spheres of the modern world. Because if a sacred bloodline truly survived, who controls it now?
Chapter 10. What if the bloodline returned today? Imagine, for a moment, a world not unlike our own. A world of shifting political alliances,
economic uncertainty, religious tension, and information spiraling faster than truth can catch it. In such a world, one revelation could ignite a global storm. One claim could shake governments, unsettle churches, and dominate headlines from Paris to Washington. One person could step forward and transform history overnight. And the catalyst for that storm? A single declaration. I am a direct descendant of the Merovingians. But not a mere claim, not rumor, not myth, not speculation, something far more powerful. Suppose this individual arrived with documented genealogies preserved across centuries. Suppose they carried relics matching descriptions found only in early chronicles. Suppose they held DNA results cross-referenced with remains from verified Merovingian tombs. Suppose they presented proof so compelling that governments couldn't simply dismiss it and media outlets couldn't ignore it. What would happen next? The answer is not simple. It is seismic. First, the political arena would fracture overnight. In France, a nation whose identity is rooted in the legacy of Frankish kings, this revelation would trigger a cultural earthquake. Monarchist movements, quiet for generations, would burst into renewed life. Some would see the descendant as a symbol of national restoration. Others would perceive a threat to the Republic. And across Europe, where royal houses still hold ceremonial power, whispers of legitimacy, lineage, and ancient rights would flood private circles. But politics would only be the beginning. The religious implications would be far more volatile, especially if the Merovingian bloodline were tied through myth, symbol, or alleged evidence to early Christianity, or even to the controversial theories about Jesus and Mary Magdalene. The Vatican would face a dilemma unprecedented in modern times. Would it reject the claimant outright? Would it attempt to reinterpret the revelation? Or would it remain silent, allowing the world to drown in speculation? None of those options would stabilize the situation. The media, meanwhile, would become a tempest. News channels would broadcast the story hourly. Social media would erupt with debates, conspiracies, and fanaticism. Experts from every field, genetics, theology, political science, would fill studio panels, arguing endlessly about the authenticity and consequences. In such chaos, the claimant could become either a unifying figure or a polarizing one. Some would crown them a symbol of ancient truth. Others would brand them an impostor, a threat, or a tool of hidden agendas. Because in the modern world, truth is not what is proven. Truth is what people believe, and belief spreads faster than any fact. But the most unsettling aspect of this scenario lies not in what would be revealed, but in what powerful institutions might attempt to conceal. If certain governments, financial networks, or religious bodies feared the consequences of a Merovingian resurgence, would they attempt to silence the claimant? Would evidence mysteriously vanish? Would the story be drowned in misinformation? Would denial become policy? History teaches us that suppressed truths do not disappear. They multiply. And the Merovingian story has always lived in the space between revelation and secrecy, a space where the past never fully dies and the present is never fully stable. So the final question remains: if the Merovingian bloodline were to step forward today, would it reshape the world or simply reveal how fragile our world already is? Because in an age driven by narrative, symbolism, and the hunger for meaning, the return of a long-lost sacred dynasty could become more than a historical revelation. It could become a global reckoning. You've just traveled through one of the most mysterious chapters of European history, uncovering legends of seaborn kings, sacred symbols hidden in stone, secret societies guarding forbidden truths, and a bloodline that may have survived in the shadows far longer than history admits. But the Merovingian mystery doesn't end here. Every artifact, every missing record, every unexplained symbol whispers that the full truth is still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest revelations are yet to come. If this documentary opened your eyes or sparked new questions, don't let the journey stop now. Subscribe to join us as we explore more forgotten histories and hidden civilizations. Like this video if you want more deep dives into ancient secrets and historical cover-ups. Comment below, which part of the Merovingian story shocked you the most? Your curiosity drives this channel. Your engagement brings these forgotten stories back to life. So until the next adventure, stay curious, stay questioning, and never stop exploring the mysteries history tried to erase.